Hey everybody, I'm Steve and this is the Deployed for Detroit School of Leadership and Madness. Forgive me a sec while I do a really quick bit of housekeeping. For some reason my name is enormous. And there's no need for that. I'm not that big of an asshole, guys. Ba-ba-da-ba-ba-ba. There we go. Alright, back to paying attention to things that are important. Hey gang, I'm Steve. And this is the Deployed from Detroit School of Leadership and Madness. Paul was going to be with me and might still be with me here soon. But just as we were about to log on, his power went out, his internet went out, and seems to be what she has wrote thus far. May not be all she wrote, though. So we'll see how that goes. The topic we want to discuss tonight is hate and why it's dumb. It's ineffective. It's not great. There's a ton of historical evidence there. And so it's kind of odd that we should even have to have a discussion like this. But it seems like, at a minimum, the discussion should be had, if not by us or with you or whomever. Like, it seems like we need to talk about what hate really is, what anger really is, where these things come from, and kind of, more importantly, where do they lead, and what we can do to overcome these things. And so this isn't, by any means, some kind of expert interjection. This is just, again, like we always do, a couple of broken toy soldiers who've been through it, just trying to give our best sort of approximation. You know, we've been through so many different situations. We've had official sort of academic training, we've had academic training in the military, directly related to this, why people would do a thing, because it's important for us to learn how to get people to do stuff. And so that's where some of this comes in. So I've had access to this for quite some time, and Paul's had access to this for quite some time. And so, yeah, that's how we know this stuff. But more importantly, like, you already pretty much know this stuff. It's not a discovery of anything sort of grand. It's something we've discussed a number of times. It all relates back to sort of Maslow's hierarchy of needs, which some people might sort of scoff at as, oh, that's just a simplification of things. And yes, it kind of is. But the great thing about simplifications is that they can give us a place to start. It beats the shit out of, wandering in the darkness. So if we can all sort of establish some kind of frameworks for communication, we can talk to each other. We can figure out, why do we hate these people? Why are we so upset by them or these things? Or is it an object? Or what is it that has got you? So I guess the first and best place to start, or maybe, realistically, the first and the worst place to start for hate, I think, is the dictionary. So let's slide over there. Merriam-Webster.com. So they say hate is an intense hostility and aversion, usually deriving from fear, anger, or sense of injury. Now that's pretty good. But if you're not 100%, if your vocabulary isn't all the way up there, this may be, tricky. Now, a more common one that I've seen displayed outside of the Webster's dictionary, which is why we use Webster, because at least it gets to that point, is an extreme dislike or disgust. And then down here it's saying a systematic and especially politically exploited expression of hatred. Now that's just dumb, right there. That doesn't mean anything. That's just saying, I don't know. We'll get into why that's a little bit problematic, especially as a noun, when they're expressing that this is never mind. And as a verb, to feel this extreme enmity or to have strong aversion or find distasteful, these are all lengthy, and they kind of beat around the bush. They all essentially they're like, they hate him. They don't like him a lot. There's a lot of synonyms to describe the same word rather than, you kind of see what I'm saying here. So let's at least start with some better definitions for the word. And I think realistically, intense hostility and aversion, extreme dislike or disgust. I mean, those are components, but those are all very strong emotional components that don't necessarily need to be present for hate to be present. That's why I don't think these are very good. I shouldn't say they're not very good. Like, who the fuck am I to say whether or not the dictionary's right? But for me, it's insufficient for our purposes. And so I think how we could best term hate is as a fixation on a perceived threat. And how many words is that? How many do we sling all this down to? Fixation on a perceived threat. So 5 words. So we knocked all this down into something a little bit easier to think about. But rather than using the word hate is when you don't like something, whatever, to the point of the thing, hate requires a level of fixation. It requires specificity. It requires focus. It requires time. It requires effort. And so it really is a fixation. If you hate something, there is something about whatever the hell you are that is just can't get this one thorn out of your side. And so the perceived threat, now that threat could be real or imagined. It's still being perceived. We talked about that when we discussed suicide, when we discussed school shooters, and those different scenarios where somebody can, where thinking the thing is true is almost the same as it being true in some cases, at least in how people behave later. Sorry, I'm getting a message here. Okay, so Paul is going to wait it out and see if his internet comes back. So I'll wing it from here. That's okay. He can cheer me on. Cheerleader. Is anybody watching here? Sorry for this brief break here. My internet connection's doing something. Well, we'll press on, folks. Okay, so we talked about hate, the definition of that. For our purposes, at least, we're going to call it the fixation on a perceived threat. And so, at least, the reason we want to narrow this down is because we're trying to determine the cause of it, or, if not cause, the motivation behind it, or you'll see what we're talking about. So, let's go back to, Maslow. And I've shown you guys this before, and of course, I'm having a little difficulty here with the screen. Let me give it a sec to see if I can get it to reload here. Sorry. I'm not sure what's happening, guys. I wonder if this does anything for us. No. It's still empty. Alright. I'm sorry for all the technical glitches and this, that, and the other, folks, but give me like half a second. And I'm going to reset that little business, and we should be good to go. Or not. Well, shit happens, gang. Oh, there it is. Hey now, it's just one of those things where, like, who cares? Let's press on, shall we? To the point. Maslow's hierarchy of needs. We've talked about this a bunch of times because it's worth talking about a lot. It's worth considering a lot in your daily sort of, if you're ever having... if you're never pleased with how you're behaving, if you think you're a little nutty, look at this thing, and this might help you figure out where your nuttiness is coming from. And so the nuttiness we're looking at specifically is the nuttiness of hate. Where does hate come from? And hate covers a lot of stuff. Hate has nationalism, where you have the Irish versus the British. That might be racism as well. It's definitely theism for sure up there, because it's the whole Catholic Protestant business. But that's mostly like, it's not as big a deal as the other stuff that sort of surrounds that. Anyway, to the point. So, hate, let's talk about it. So where does it start? And then, you know what? Gang, let's come up with another quick distinction too, because I think hate is separate from anger. Anger is where hate is a prolonged fixation on this perceived threat. So you think this thing is somehow dangerous, and you need to make sure it's either neutralized, disappeared, whatever it is, but it needs to no longer become a threat. But then there's just plain old anger, and sometimes, we throw words around rather poetically and hyperbolically, and we don't have to punish ourselves for that. But as long as when we are being clear with one another and clarifying, we should know sort of at the root what these words really mean, so we can express ourselves better in these ways. So I think anger is, and you might think it could be so many other things. You think about violence and where anger comes up and where hate comes up in violence. And so hate, it makes sense for violence because you perceive this thing to be a threat, or this person to be a threat, or this environment to be a threat. But anger is a suite of reactions that result from your expectation not being met, and like dramatically not being met. And what's crazy is that is also where humor comes from. The reason jokes are funny is because you're surprised. There's always something, you're like, oh, I didn't see that coming. And that's the bit that causes you to laugh, is the thing that sort of doesn't meet your expectation. You didn't quite see it coming. And that's also why you hear a lot of people say you can either get angry or you can laugh. You can always get upset or you can laugh. And I mean, even depression to a certain degree could be caused by things not meeting your expectation. I mean, shit, almost completely because of that to a certain degree. Either you don't believe you meet certain expectations of other people, or the world is not meeting your personal expectation and now you're just depressed by it. I mean, that's fully there too. And so these are just an option that you can choose from. Anger is, at least. But it's brought out mechanically by the same stuff that would bring about laughter. And then it really just kind of, your response is based on your conditioning and how well you can learn to just brush shit off your shoulder, which is a very difficult thing to do. That's why, so I'm not a Christian, but let's make the point that what Jesus said was novel about turning the other cheek. That blew people's minds. The idea of just like, nah, fuck that guy, leave him alone, don't worry about it, move on. That, they're like, I'm supposed to take his eye though? Like, who has a month to dedicate to tracking down some guy's nephew and peeling out his eye? I don't have time for that shit. Just screw him. He was a dick. Whatever. That was mind-blowing to people at that time. And because it's not anything that, and we've talked about this in previous episodes too, it's, we've developed as humans over time by spending a lot longer time as other things. And these other things had reactions and had responses and had capabilities, And so we have those same capabilities because we're built from the same little things. And so that the reactions to things, the way people, untrained people fight, it looks like monkeys fighting. It's put them side by side, and you're like, oh, look at that. That's creepier than I thought. Let me get back to the point here. So we got anger is a reaction. And now you can't be blamed for, I would hope that you can't be blamed for becoming angry, because I become angry all the fucking time. I try to be as pleasant as I can, not as a show, because I enjoy it. I enjoy the pleasant version of myself. I think that version of myself is pretty cool. The angry version of myself is a bit of a douche. I'm not a fan. I don't enjoy riding that beast around like a wet water buffalo through a china shop. It's the Hulk with Joe Pesci's vocabulary from Goodfellas. It's just not fun. But because of the PTSD shit, and so because of the sort of traumatic conditioning, signals get to me a little bit quicker than I can sort of, the human part of me can respond to. And so it's difficult to explain if you've never really been in it, but like, I'm always kind of overwhelmed, just like how the Hulk is always kind of angry. And then so it's a matter of managing how overwhelmed I am. And the anger comes through when all of a sudden my sort of barrier that I've built of, you know, whatever kind of pretend normal bumble I have, or like whatever my coping mechanism is, again, it's surprise that triggers it. And then all of a sudden I'm just a shitty creature. And it's not always. I'm getting better at it. And a lot of times it's hilarious because I'll get, and I mean, it's not hilarious for some of the participants, but like I'll get deep into, just real aggressive and nasty for a second. And then like half a second in it, like, you know what? I'm real sorry. I'm being a bit of an asshole. Like I kind of swung there for a second. And if you can give me a breather, I'm going to be way more pleasant and then apologetic here in a moment. And then they're like, okay. And then, you know, I explain myself and they get it and we get it and we're better. But it's a thing. It's part of the reaction. And so it's just one of those that's in there. I have better reactions. I've developed better reactions to surprise. In most cases, I laugh. And you'll see me laughing a lot. And it comes from that same thing, that persistent level of chaos management. And so things slip through. And so that's why I may even laugh at my own shit that I say, because I'm surprised by what I've said. Like there's so much going on that sometimes I have no idea. Like I know what I intend to say, but who knows how it gets out there? You know, there's a gap between here and here that's difficult to explain. But let's get back on track here. So now we have a definition of anger is surprise. Anger is surprise and then aggression on top of it's an aggressive reaction to surprise. And so you've been surprised by something, a wheel got spun. Should I laugh at it? Should I cry about it? Or should I punch it? You picked punch, and that's where anger comes from. And so that's kind of how we work as people when surprises come. So, imagine a surprise party. Who don't you throw surprise parties for, and why? Is it because they'll punch someone? Yeah, this is precisely what I'm talking about. This is where these things come from. And so hatred is bananas in so many other ways, because it's this fixation on this threat, and then this prolonged, sort of stretched out version of anger, where anger over time becomes something else, because you're not, it's no longer just that you're surprised that this thing didn't meet your expectation. You are now furious that it does not. You're now furious that it will not, that it cannot. Something about that is so anathema to you. And so it's, if you remember Plato's allegory of the cave, where this person lives, imagine if you just lived in a room and you just watched YouTube all day. And then, we've been doing that, haven't we? Now, imagine that without the ability to go outside, without the ability to go on a vacation sometime, or go visit with friends at some point, or without any of that. You're just stuck watching this. And so this is what the world is. This is what everything I tell you is all that there is of the world. And then you go outside and you see a blue jay for the first time. You're going to shit your pants. Holy moly. It just killed a rat, and it's still pretty. And so there's a level of discomfort, and I totally blew it in the description. Poor Plato is rolling in whatever grave he's in. But there's this shock, this moment of shock, and either you can go, oh, holy moly. And that's absurdist theory, is the idea is the universe is always going to do that, and so you just pick one, just laugh. It's almost like a Pascal's wager to a certain degree, absurdism. It's like a Pascal's wager, but towards humor. Elect laughing when sorrow is also a choice, or anger is also a choice, because humor is also a choice too. It's always going to be there. I don't know. If I had a point, I've forgotten. So I'm going to move it on to, let's get to the mechanics of why somebody's actually feeling this way. Because it is interesting, because it deflates it. It makes you realize Nazis are really dumber than anything else. Like, they're scary, but it's mostly because they're dumb. Okay, the screen did its thing. Okay, and we're back. So if we start at the bottom, the physiological stuff is immediate threats to something that would stop the metabolism of the human body. Something that is in the process of killing you, hurting you, damaging you. Frostbite, being on fire, being strangled, being stabbed, drowning, stuff like that. Or the perception that something comparable to that is happening, like a panic attack, terror, like night terror kind of thing, any sort of like severe panic episode is like a physiological, your body thinks you're dying in the moment. At least mine did. Also, BT Dubs, not a doctor. This is just what my experience, and then when Paul gets on eventually here, our experience as crazy people. Safety here. Safety is, and these are the same slides from suicide, because really they don't need to be that different, and that's also why go read Maslow, and if not, just pay attention a little bit. Safety is an environmental thing, so your body is not under threat, but your immediate environment is under threat. And so you're just completely bummed out because something is causing the house you're in to be threatened. Something about your food supply is threatened. Your water supply is threatened. Something that you use to maintain your physiological safety is at risk. So you may not be strangled, but the stuff you use to keep you from being strangled is at risk. That's also not the best. I'm going to stop being so self-critical, guys. I'm just being a dick to myself. Social needs are part of the group. You need to belong to a pack because we are pack animals. Sorry, lone wolves. I'm definitely a hermit myself. And I've been in kind of isolation for 5 years. But I still get out every couple of weeks, every couple of months. I might go do something for a couple of weeks. I'm not completely neglecting social experience, but you do need to belong to part of a group. I still need to belong to my family, even though, I may not see them every day. I still am comfortable with the fact that, we're a family, and that's important. So the social the social threats that come, because the big value of being in a group is that you can't do everything on your own, especially now in a super stretched out advanced society where we've got so many different trades and skills and this, that, and the other. There's no way you can do just normal day-to-day stuff by yourself. You can't hunter-gather your way into an iPhone and a computer setup like I've got with this. I don't have an iPhone. But like how all this madness that we're doing right now, I can do quite a bit of it, but there's no way I can do all of it, most of it, much of it. Like my actual percentage of effort that I put in, even though pretty intense, is pretty minuscule in the overall stretch, which is why we need to belong to the overall an organization, a structure, a family, a group, some kind of bigger collective, just because we can't do it alone. And so there's something about us that knows we need other people. And so we do at times become desperate when we feel like our bond to those people might be broken, or maybe those people might become threatened, or something about their way of life or behavior, or who knows, but we're afraid for our neighbors. Esteem is as somebody develops, they're part of a group, and now they want to be the chief, or now they want to be the leader, or now they want to be something in the group. They want to be an astronaut or a firefighter or something. This is that part of personal development where I am of this tribe, and of this tribe I do this. And so you start to find more self-discovery. But you can also be kind of selfish in this period too, because as you're cultivating this new ego, it's very precious to you. And so you can kind of be shitty in this phase. Self-actualization is when you've gotten past this, and so now no one's strangling you, your house isn't on fire, everybody loves you, you know exactly how to do everything you like to do, and now you're like, you know what, I should do something for other people. And this is the self-actualization phase. You've gotten to the end of what it means to be a human, and this is where you start to make better decisions, and where maybe you can start to find rational reasons to do a thing. And even if it's not rational, it's where you can find the delusion that a thing is rational. And so you can see why someone might believe they should kill someone for a good reason. We have execution as a country. We have war as a country. We have police officers with the authorization for lethal force as a country. So in America, we definitely believe it's okay to kill people if we have a good reason. So we've, obviously this is, I don't know, here. Let's deal with a person, because sometimes looking at a slide, talking about shit like this is not going to help. Just because it's difficult, and you need to know another person is here dealing with the fact that, yes, this is difficult. So where does hate come from? So hate is the fixation, is this perceived fixation. So if you hate someone, you're really not able to hate anyone in a sort of physiological way. I mean, you can, well, no, let's tailor it back, and let's be smart about this. Let's talk about the physiological solution and then the response. So the physiological response is that you're being immediately, we'll go with strangled. Strangled's pretty easy. You can think about that. You can even kind of, oh dear, and imagine a little bit. Don't go too nuts though. But so you can kind of get, all right, what's going to cause hate? So, all right, you're going to generate hatred towards whatever is on the other end, because you're triggering your aggressive response rather than just laughing through your own death, which, I mean, if you don't think you can fight back, that's kind of a baller way to go out, versus what's the other response? Depression, crying. So again, there's one of three responses here. At least if I'm missing one, I'll kick myself in the ass for it later. But I mean, these are the big three that that are immediately jumping out as far as surprise. And so, and then now, let's bring it back to now. So Let me slow down here. That'll help too. Something we've brought up in the past that I just completely forgot, and then I'm going to remember again here. Mental health is crazy, folks, and being crazy is even nuttier than you thought. We're talking about physiological, we're talking about hate, we're talking about, so we're talking about the benefit of this, because as we talked about in school shootings, as we talked about in suicide, the reason you feel these way, the reason you're feeling this, the reason this emotion is transpiring, the reason these reactions are transpiring is because at one point they were beneficial to our survival. At some point these were useful. And to some degree, if curtailed and if used appropriately, one might be able to gain benefit from it. And so if someone is strangling you, maybe that hatred, so you're surprised now that this person is strangling you, because it's usually a surprise to most people. So now you kick in, and then this aggression, and that kicks in adrenaline, that kicks in all the other blood starts pumping, your heart starts moving, your muscles can get oxygen much faster, you can fight much quicker. And so a physiological response to hate in the moment is completely justified. And it's there so that you have enough go juice to get you out of that scenario, maybe. Now, the problem is all that primeval stuff is really difficult to wrangle if you're not trained. And that's where you'll see somebody who's being attacked turn around and just brutalize their attacker, cave their face in, just animalistic stuff, tearing and scratching and like, whoa, chimpanzees, calm it down. Because they're still utilizing that set of skills, that ancient set of like, hey, just in case you can't figure this one out, there's always scratching their eyes out. And you're like, thanks, Genes. It's being a person is so weird, guys and gals, and in between, everybody. I mean, fucking A, being a person sucks, but it's also pretty awesome most of the time. Let's get back on it here. So, physiological hate. So you have that, I'm being strangled, I'm being wrestled, something's happening to me. You're getting that boost of aggression, and now you can get them off of you. The difficulty is cutting off that hate and not letting it persist into additional violence beyond what's necessary to just stop the threat from happening. And so, also why you see untrained fighters go past their level, and go into like more violence than is necessary, is because they just don't know when to stop. They've never had training on when it's enough. When, nobody's told them like, okay, that'll do. And so they just don't have a tell me when button on their violence. And so they're just going all for it. So it's pretty wild at times, but it's explainable. It is natural, and it's not anything to be ashamed of that you have been taken over by this. It's not anything other than you, but it is something separate inside you. So it's weird. It's uncomfortable. It's hard to articulate. It's hard to, there's no, I would hope that a lot of you can understand this, but I can't ever pretend to assume anyone. And my hope is that most of you do. But I would be an idiot to think everybody. Like, you just have to know there's limitations to anything. Alright, so let's go on to safety. Not even showing you guys the slides here again. Safety. So let's talk about safety hate. You can hate if you want to. You can leave your friends behind. Bonus points to anyone who knows that song. Hint, hint. So your environment is under threat. And so now let's talk about an aggressive response. Now let's say you perceived a threat. So either you're angry or you hate somebody because of danger to your environment. So you think something about your food supply, your shelter, fences, crops, vehicles, anything that you use in your day-to-day life, all the people that you rely on to get by, that's your sort of safety bit. And if that's threatened, that can trigger hate, because somebody may perceive someone as a threat or as a reason for why their safety is at risk. And so sometimes that is true if there is a real threat, and oftentimes it's just a perceived threat because of poor social education. So I can jump to a topic that is super uncomfortable for a lot of people and is real comfortable for me because it wasn't me. My granddaddy's granddaddy was a fella named Randall McCoy, who was in the Confederate Army. And he didn't own any slaves, and he didn't fight for slavery for the most part. He didn't fight for his own slaves. He didn't own any. He was way too poor for that. What he fought for was, he wasn't for slavery, but he was against emancipation. And this is the problem that struck out, because people went through the South saying, well, if we get this emancipation business and then we get all these black folks out of here, there's no fucking way they're going to hire you. You Irish fucking hillbilly. You Scottish half-bred, you know. They went right in, because the thing about racism is hilarious, because ask a racism, or ask like a real diehard racist about the different kinds of white people, and you'll realize that, like, oh, there's like weird nuance and depth to like how these people hate, and it's essentially just a not me thing. So everybody but me thing. And so the rich folks in the South went around and told all the poor folks in the South, which is outside of race, the real thing that pisses people off in America is poor people. And they're just bummed out by them, and they try to manage them like cattle, and maybe they'll get by and die off or something. That's the American, I don't know if that's the American dream, but that's how that shit works out, yo. And so they went around telling all these Southern families that, you know, as soon as these black folks get out, all the jobs are gone, bud. Ain't no jobs, because we can hire these folks for a nickel. And, oh, actually, it wouldn't be a nickel, because that would be a shitload back then. So, like, you know, a nickel a month or so. I don't know old-timey currency, all right, folks? But what they did was they're going to take your jobs bit, which, where have I heard that before? And yeah, it's the exact same shit with the Mexican immigrants. And it's the same thing the Chinese immigrants went through. It's the same thing the Irish and Italian immigrants went through. Same thing the German immigrants went through. The Finnish. Of course, obviously, the African immigrants, by choice or otherwise, the slaves who we dragged over here. You know, I got off track here again, folks. My apologies. It's a common thing for, if you think too quick, to kind of get off the rails. Most people have it. It's not great, though, when you're trying to do, like, a live thing. You know what I mean? But anyway, racism. It's safety. That's what we're talking about. So, they take our jobs bit. That's, you know, and, oh, yeah. So that's how, like, so, and if they weren't afraid of, oh, they'd take our jobs, then when the Civil War actually broke out, these people were knuckle deep in it. They didn't have a choice, because they said, now that the war's going on, if we let these folks out, they're going to fucking straight up kill you, because now you're in a gray uniform and you're done, bud. And so it was just better to fight for the Confederacy, because who the hell knows? They didn't have any All they knew was what they knew, and it wasn't much, unfortunately. Like, I love my family, but they weren't brilliant back then. Well, maybe we'll get into a whole episode on those folks, because they were, ooh-wee. I love them to pieces. But bless their heart, if you know what that means. That's code for stuff. But that's where racism comes in most cases. And that's where you can trick most people, and that's how. And unfortunately, this is the method by which you get a large population to buy into racist ideology. And so if somebody is in the poverty spectrum, if they're not making enough money, if they're living paycheck to paycheck, that's somebody that you can real easy turn into a racist. Because you can say, the minute I get rid of blank, whatever shade you're talking about, all the jobs come back, you get all the benefits, the park will be nice, this will happen, that'll happen, blah, 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 blah. That has never in the history of our species happened. Every time that happens, you get rid of one race, then you start getting rid of shades of people. And before you know it, we all look the same, and nobody's having a good time. It's a bummer. All right, so where does the other level of hate and anger come from? Let's move on up to Maslow talking about social. So this is your family. This is your group. This is where someone... and again, the pyramid's here too, because it's kind of like you can see population slices of like how likely someone is, at least for these knucklehead decisions, to be making the decision based on these reasons, you know? So social is kind of like a 50-50, where if somebody thinks that being racist will engender them to the group, then they'll start being racist. Now, I mean, yeah, that's pretty cut and dry as is. Like, there could be people who, you know, and it may not even be people who have hate, people who perceive a persistent threat. But racism is a few flavors of things, but mostly it's just the identification of the other, and then sort of, I mean, just kind of like a weird persistent commentary on an established other. And like, it's really kind of bizarre. There's not, again, I don't know. There's no historical benefit yet for it. So prove me wrong, shitheads, but I've read more than you and I haven't seen it. So in these social reasons, this is somebody getting peer pressured into it. This is, or maybe like telling racist jokes around the cooler. That gets you, I tell Pollock jokes and gets me in with the boss. And before you know it, like, but that's not how you start Nazis. Like, Nazis get started through the safety group, through people who are like, people who don't know how to feed themselves. These social people are people who think that, like, hey, those Nazis have a cool party. I kind of want to get in on that shit. And so they start behaving like those people because they want to get into that group. And so, like, but I mean, they're usually dejected people. They feel like losers. That's why subconsciously they're flying the flags of losers. They're tattooing the symbols of losers on their bodies. They're just telling everyone, I'm a fucking loser. And they fly it above their house. I'm a loser. And like, but then they all have their loser flags and they have their loser club. And that's how they point each other out. And it's how it's not because most of these people hate anything. It's because they just fucking need friends. They need a community. They need someone to have a potluck dinner with once in their fucking life. And I'll be goddamned if the KKK doesn't do that sometimes. Like, and that's how people sometimes get in this social aspect. Because like I said, we can't do it alone. And when people are struggling and they have nowhere else to turn, I mean, this is why it's so... You see this specific fixation, this hate in prisons, because like there is persistent threat, but it's generated by the hate itself and by the segregation itself. So it's all horse shit to begin with. But you don't know who to trust, so you just start picking arbitrarily. And so you go, I'll pick the ones who look like me and we'll start there. But if you talk to anybody who's been to jail, like, that didn't really mean shit. It didn't mean anything because you were just as likely to get stabbed in the back by your own crew as by anyone else. And so all that shit falls by the wayside, but it's like a real quick, it's weird. It's our like default, like we don't know what to do, so let's play Duck Duck Goose. Like for us, we're like we don't understand hierarchy, so let's just break off into shades and see what happens. Like I don't know where it started, I don't know when it started, but it's dumb. It's just not brilliant. So let's move on to esteem. How could an esteemed person be such an asshole? Boo boo boo. Hate and anger. An esteemed anger. That's a surprise about somebody just talk shit about you. I think you're a jerk. I think you tell people you're nice, but I bet you're a jerk. If you get all pissy with me, that's anger by esteem. And if you laughed, that's you laughing through esteem. If you cried, I'm sorry, but hey, remember, that's just the depression reaction to this whole surprise business. So that's the initial sort of, and then so if you perceive a threat here, it's a threat to yourself. And so these kind of people are, and again, like we talked about with killers and suicide and a lot of people, this esteem, people who go haywire here are, it's usually like a real dickhead move in most cases. And so a lot of times they have yet to develop esteem. And so what they'll do is they're like, well, my self-esteem's here. And when I call this other fella names, it goes up just a little bit. So I'll put that there. Okay. And so I'm just going to keep calling this guy names until I get there. Now I feel better. That's esteem. Anger, at least. Or it's the persistence of it, where it's existing. It's all towards oneself, or one's opinion of oneself, or how much value you hold towards your, like, it's you, buddy. And so hate, it means that you are fixated on a perceived threat to something about you, not you. It's not your body. This isn't a physiological thing. This isn't a safety thing. This isn't a sniper's coming to get you. But you may hate people and think that they're sending snipers out to get you and have this whole big fucking highfalutin idea of things. If you're in this esteem level of thinking, because it's all ego, it's all me, baby. They're out to get me. This is where a lot of paranoia comes from, a lot of hate from, oh, you know why? We need to get those people? Because they run the fucking... They're in charge of the... We can't say it because we know who. You know who. That whole spectrum of things is people so up their own ass about who they are or who they wanted to be, and their anger comes from they expected such great things for themselves and fucking none of them happened, or a significant amount didn't, or something blew up in their face, but they just clung to that anger, and so they're in this persistent state, and they think that applying some kind of aggression towards it will somehow get rid of their whatever the hell they think is, a threat to them. And so in some cases, like, we can go back to racism. Like, how would somebody perceive an entire race to be a threat to them? Paranoid delusion. Just straight up. If somebody thinks, oh, the Jews are out to get me, oh, the blacks are out to get me, oh, the whites are out to get me personally. Now, you can say, hey, there's a whole mess of white fellers who want to kill a whole mess of black fellers, and there's a whole mess of black fellers who want, like, you can generalize sort of in bigger spectrums, but if you're saying that someone has, like, my name on a board, and they all happen to be like just a billion Guatemalans, like, Steve, it's fucking donezo. That's not happening. Are you shitting me? No. So it's none of it can come from that. So there is no there's no real logical, esteemed reason to persistently sort of hate somebody, because there's always better options. There's things that if you had enough confidence in yourself and your capability, then this exterior threat wouldn't matter at all. And I mean, that's really the biggest thing. That's the sort of huge weakness there in a lot of these sort of esteem functions of hatred, is the just ultimate lack in confidence. And because they are not confident in their own capability, they need to make sure other people lose confidence in the capability of others. because, I can't swim 100 meters, so let's make sure nobody else swims 100 meters. And it's a myth. And anybody who swims past 100 meters, we shoot him in the head. Everybody else, like, oh, he got the world record, 88 meters. Like, we build a fake world where just because I don't feel like learning how to swim another fucking 100 feet. Who cares? Like, and that is as ridiculous and as arbitrary as that metaphor may be. That's North Korea. That is Albania. I mean, that's a lot of places on Earth where they're never planning on cutting it, and so they have a lot of low bars in those countries. That's not why they're short. It's because of malnutrition. It's just coincidental. But they set the bar so fucking low that, like, even on nothing and through starvation and with their people dying and their neighbors going, they can still claim these minor, useless kind of victories. And so you see if you look at our talk on, like, the school shooting bit and with suicide, and which is an act of self-violence, but, like, or at a minimum self-directed violence, hate and anger at the esteem level are not really rational. And if you kind of think back on it, they're also kind of juvenile. And that's because most of this esteem stuff is kind of developed through the juvenile to late juvenile period. So, like, by the time you're 26, 27, we shouldn't be giving a shit about, like, well, I'm the best bowler in my league. Like, that's not the story to be telling, knucklehead. No one cares. But, like, if you're hearing that, it's from in early teen, mid-20s. Some heads are popping now. Because this happens there. And it's also why you really don't have to, like, you should respect you should respect that people can develop opinions, but you don't have to respect their opinion. Most opinions are fucking useless. Like, it's a value statement attached to an observation. That's a thing, and I either agree with it, disagree with it, enjoy it, or dislike it. And then to cling to it like that's a ribbon of what are you talking about? Come on now. Let's get back on, shall we? So is there self-actualized hate? Is there some kind of, I've done things I understand who I am, I understand what value I bring to the community, So what does bringing hate to the community look like? What is that? And that's that murky sort of gray area as to why it exists in society still, why we see it in different components of our life. So and the reason I use fixation is because hate is unhealthy and fixations are unhealthy, rather than, and maybe I should have made that distinction earlier, because a fixation is something that takes away time that is unnecessarily allotted to it, rather than having, one could say maybe dedication is the same as fixation, but we attribute dedication as to something that may be beneficial in the long run. But they kind of look the same, and so maybe somebody has a form of self-actualized hate, and so now they're a senator or a congressman or a representative, or they're somewhere out in the world, and they're saying, we got to get these Mexicans out of here. We got to get these Somalians, these El Salvador, these, pick a name, we'll get them out of here. Like, it's my policy that these what have you colored fellers from this country and that that's that self-actualized hate, because it's the mistake that what they're doing is protecting people, because somehow they've gotten up into this chain and they mean well enough. They, at the root, hope to be doing the right thing. No one's running out there like, all right, gang, let's fuck this up. I have thoughts on the current president that maybe he's one of those types who's like, yeah, let's fuck this up. But I don't know. We'll wait till after. We'll wait till way after, because for sure this is a hindsight thing. But let's get to the point. If you have somebody for any reason, so even Knucklehead himself, who let's build the fucking wall, it's not because he has any knowledge that a wall will help people, because it sure as shit won't. And so there is no knowledge like that to have. But at a minimum, it's a fucking thought. And he's like, well, it'll work. And he could sell the shit out of it. And there you go. And it's all based on the idea. It's as dumb as it is, as ineffectual as it is. It's all based on something at a core that can be mistaken for a good idea. And that's the hardest part too. When you're talking to somebody who has these views, who has a view that is different from yours, that causes you to have one of those three emotions. Either you start crying, you start cussing, or you start laughing. And maybe they are someone that you fixate on as this is a persistent threat to my safety, physiology, social, the list goes on. We've seen it here, and here. Ba-ba-da-ba. Sorry. Oh. The Adventures of Four Screens, folks. Dee-dee-dee. So all of these, at all times, when these people are in the process of doing vile shit, the unfortunate part is that they're doing it for what they perceive to be a good reason. That's the unfortunate business that we wanted to make clear in the school shooting part, in the suicide part, in any kind of discussion on these lines. When you have what you might call aberrant behavior, when you have something that surprises you, it's because something's happening along this spectrum, and the person who's surprising you has different priorities because they're perceiving something completely different from you. Yes, we all share an objective reality, but we all operate in individual subjective realities that we have to cultivate and share and work out together, which is why you can't just stare at one YouTube channel all day or two, or any really all day is problematic. But you can't put yourself in Plato's cave. You have no one to bounce ideas off. You have no one to tell you you're full of shit. You have no one to... All that isolation is problematic. So, to the point here. What do you do? So, we've talked about Epictetus in the past, the Enchiridion, or the manual, as it's called a lot of times, the translation. Sorry for the noises again. In there's this sort of that's a 90s tick of mine, some sort of thing. There is a discussion about someone coming at you, and he says every problem is imagine a jug with two handles, and one handle's broken and one handle's fine. And so somebody is handing you this jug, and you decide to grab it by the broken handle and get stabbed in the hand, and you're all pissed off. That is 100% the problem with tackling it that way, with addressing it that way. When you grab the problem arrow end first, let's say, maybe, rather than grabbing it by the feathers, you grab it by the arrow. Both ways stop it, but one way for sure hurts you. And so turn that puppy around. And that's when you need to, I fucking hate you. No, I love you. That's the problem. That's why I'm so angry. That's why I'm so surprised. Because I love you, and I thought that other people I loved in my community, members of my family, I expected them to sort of maintain the same sort of ethical code I did. And I just don't know how to feel when I find out Uncle so-and-so or Cousin so-and-so or the state of whatever or the country. It's again that surprise. And it's a matter of how long do you exist in that state of surprise? How long do you let that knock you off your own ass? And then do you retreat into aggression? Do you retreat into sorrow? Do you retreat into humor? What do you do to acknowledge your surprise? Because if you're not acknowledging your surprise, if you're not laughing, if you're not crying, and if you're not punching somebody, then you are for sure in denial, because that's all we got left is just, everything's fine. And that's another sort of problem we end up with, too, is where these behaviors aren't corrected in the public because we're not sort of correcting we're not helping one another through this process. hang on. That thought is not fully. That's a thought for another stage. All right. I'm going to pause here for just a second. Now, if you guys could do us a favor, I appreciate having any and all of the viewers we get. We know that you don't have to watch this. We know that sometimes watching mental patients ramble through a PowerPoint presentation is exactly what it sounds like. And so thank you for enduring that when it requires endurance. And it definitely allows us to breeze through the bits we can breeze through, because we have a great time doing this and providing, whatever kind of service we can. So if you have any suggestions or comments for the show, you can send us an email at dfd.slm@deployedfromdetroit.com. We're on Facebook, we're on Instagram, we're on YouTube, we're on this, we're on that. I'm not great at social media. I don't like it. I'm not a fan. I used to be, and then it bummed me out. So we need your guys' help there too. We're not great at getting our own story out, which is unfortunate. We should be better champions of our own story, but we're not great at it. We're shut-ins. I talk too much. There's all kinds of problems involved, folks. So we could definitely use your help. So the whole like, subscribe, yada, yada, but definitely share, or at least talk about it, or talk about, if not the show, the topics we talk about. At least get the conversations happening. Because like I said, it doesn't matter that we have these conversations. It just matters that these conversations occur. I know that might be weird, but it's very important that these things just float in the air, because they just need to be out there for when someone needs to reach for it. And that's the benefit we have here, and that's the thing we can do. Is this may not be a solution, but this is a nail or a board one can put together in whatever lifeboat we start building. So check that out. I think if I beat this topic any further, there's not going to be much point. We've already been an hour. So I love you guys. Please forward any questions you have about Maslow's hierarchy of needs. I'm going to pop the screen up again. It was first published in A Theory of Human Motivation in 1943. It's a bit academic because it's academic. I might suggest going and finding a book about it, or a video about Maslow's hierarchy and his theory of human motivation. Not saying you can't understand it, but I'm just saying having a hint when you start, sure as hell, it wouldn't hurt. So, thank you very much. We love the fuck out of you guys. We really do. We couldn't do this without you. Just kidding. We totally could. But there wouldn't be any point. So, have a good time. Go do warrior stuff. Bye-bye.